Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this press briefing on behalf of the IMFC. I am delighted to introduce to you this afternoon the chairman of the IMFC is Governor Leseja Ganyago, who, as you know, is the governor of the Reserve Bank of South Africa. We also have with us the managing director of the IMF, Madame Christine Lagarde. I'm going to ask the chairman to make a few opening remarks. I know you all have the IMFC communiqué, so the chairman may touch on that, and then we'll take your questions. And as usual, this particular press conference will be fairly brief, as is our custom, because we're all running to other things. But we will try and take as many questions as we can. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. And let me thank Christine Lagarde for hosting our meetings at IMF headquarters. We had very productive discussions over the past 2 days. Let me review them briefly before taking your questions. As you see from the communiqué, we agreed that global expansion is continuing, but at a slower pace since the IMFC last convened in October. While we expect to see a pick-up next year, trade tensions, geopolitical risks, and political uncertainties are among the challenges. So we agreed we need to act promptly to protect the expansion. The communiqué outlines some of the policies that will be necessary to do this. Fiscal policy, for example, should remain flexible and growth-friendly, rebuild buffers, and strike the right chord between debt sustainability and supporting demand. We also agreed that our social objectives need to be considered in the fiscal policy mix. Monetary policies should ensure that inflation is on track towards targets and inflation expectations are well anchored. And we agreed that central bank decisions need to remain well communicated and data dependent. We will also need to tackle financial stability risks if they emerge, with all the available tools, including macro-prudential tools. Joint action was a theme flagged in the communiqué in terms of upgrading international cooperation and confronting broader global challenges. Priorities among them are trade, global imbalances, international corporate taxation, debt vulnerabilities, climate change, and cyber risks. We also welcomed Christine's global policy agenda with these challenges in mind. We reaffirmed our commitment to a strong, quota-based and adequately resourced IMF to preserve its role at the center of the global financial safety net. We had encouraging discussions as to how that can be achieved by the time the IMFC next meets, which will be in October at our annual meetings. We have good momentum coming out of these spring meetings and made good progress to complete the job by the annual meetings. Now let me take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please identify yourself by name and affiliation. Okay. Lady in the front row.
Thank you. Maolin Xiong with Xinhua News Agency. My question is regarding the IMF's role because the global economy slows down with some downside risks, and I think multilateralism is also being challenged at some point. And in this particular time, how do you view IMF's role, and what do you think China can play a role in IMF and in global economic governance? Thank you.
The IMF is an institution with membership, and the articles of the IMF spell out the role that the IMF plays with respect to its membership. A key value addition of the IMF is, of course, providing analysis of the global economy and also providing an analysis of the individual economies of the member countries. China is a member of the IMF, and like all other members of the IMF, China also does undergo an Article 4 assessment by the fund, and any responsibility or any analysis of what is happening with China gets captured in that Article 4 report. China is a significant economy, and that means that what happens in China does affect other economies around the globe, and that is how we see it.
MD, would you like to add?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Staying in the front row, Japan, please.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm Naoatsu Aoyama from Japan's newspaper, the Asahi Shimbun. I would like to put a question to Madame Lagarde. Japan, as president of the G20 meetings this year, tries to focus on global external imbalances and proposes that imbalances be addressed in the context of restoring savings investment balance, not by rather than bilateral trade measures. Could I have your views on this approach? And more generally, what are your expectations for Japan as president of the G20 this year?
Well, first of all, I would like to tell you that all participants, finance ministers, central bank governors and their teams are very much looking forward to going to Fukuoka. We are very impressed by the Japanese leadership, by their organization, by the focus they have on the agenda. Clearly, the topic of demographics cuts across all countries and all regions, whether advanced, emerging or low income, whether it's aging, whether it is youth dividends, all of that is critically important. Second topic of health, and clearly pension, which has a clear impact on fiscal policies and fiscal space, is also a very good topic. And the third one you have mentioned, of the global imbalances, is in our view the best way to aim at this good global equilibrium where all countries can actually navigate their path of fiscal, monetary policy and structural reforms in a harmonious way around the world. And it is in our view, particularly given that we are in charge of the external sector report, it's the best way to look at an inclusive model where all countries are concerned and involved, and where the level of savings and the level of investments actually determine the position of each and every one relative to all the others.
Thank you, Madam Lagarde. Wall Street Journal, please. Josh Zumbrun.
Josh Zumbrun from the Wall Street Journal. Madam Lagarde, since the IMF met in October, a number of the central bankers who have been here this week have been facing renewed political pressure. In the United States, obviously, President Trump has not only tweeted about what he wants the Fed to do, but has also begun kind of appointing people who would take the central bank possibly in a more political direction. And many central banks around the world are facing pressure and questions about whether there should be more coordination between monetary and fiscal authorities. I'm curious, are you alarmed by what we're seeing in terms of political pressure on central banks, or is there perhaps a welcome discussion that there needs to be more political involvement in how they carry out their operations?
You know, what I can tell you is that on the part of all the central bank governors that I have discussed with in the last 3 days, there was a shared concern on their part about two principles, maybe three. The first one was the principle of accountability and how they have to report back to who they are accountable to. The second one was the principle of transparency of the process by which they reach conclusions or decisions. And probably the third one is that of communication and the ways in which they can come across the often obscure, jargonic language of central bankers, with no offense to my neighbor, and also a very, very eloquent communicator. And I think all of them were saying we need these three components in order to be credible and in order to deliver on our mandate. And they have different mandates, and there are different ways around the world to organize oneself, clearly, when you're a central bank governor. But independence has served them well over the course of time, and hopefully will continue to do so.
I will just add something, say that institutions in society are created for a purpose. And central banks were created for a particular purpose, and that purpose of central banks is normally spelled in the founding laws of a country. In the case of South Africa, the mandate of our central bank is spelled out in the constitution of the Republic of South Africa. And there is an increasing trend anyway towards more independent rather than less independent central banks. The clearer the mandate of a central bank, the easier it is to hold a central bank accountable. And so, whilst the central banks are given the independence to pursue their mandate, the flip side of independence is that of accountability, that central banks have got to be accountable on how well they are doing in fulfilling their mandates. The broader the mandate, the more difficult it is to hold the central banks accountable with respect to the execution of their mandates.
Thank you very much. I want to take AFP in the third row. Delphine, can you hold up your hand, please? Thank you.
Two questions for Christine Lagarde, please. The first one about Venezuela. I wanted to know if you have made any progress in reconnection of the government. And the second question is, I wanted to know if you share the view of Bruno Le Maire, who said yesterday that the main differences in EU could be a threat for the common currency euro.
Well, thank you so much. On Venezuela, first of all, I reiterate that we are extremely concerned about the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding under our eyes, and the fact that so many people are being affected in their physical integrity, and so many are being displaced and taking shelters in neighboring countries all the way down to Argentina. And we're talking millions here. Second point that I want to reaffirm as well is that we can only be guided by the membership. So it's not a question of us deciding. It has to be a large majority of the membership actually recognizing diplomatically the authorities that they regard as legitimate. And as soon as that happens, then we move following our membership. So we will continue to monitor that. I know that there are some members who are also looking at their respective positions, and as soon as that happens and we can actually identify the authorities, then we stand ready to move in and help and sort of harness all our resources if we are asked to help together with others. On the there were quite a few discussions about the euro area, its strength, and as you know, we have recommended repeatedly the strengthening of the architecture of the euro area in at least two domains. One is completion of the banking union, which is not going to make anybody dream, but it's going to give huge stability when it happens. And second, a deep euro capital market that companies, enterprises could tap into in order to get finance on a much broader basis. So the fact that there is possibly asymmetry in terms of positioning between various members inside the euro area might be, in our view, what we have called the trade-off between members, so that one member agrees to do something in consideration for which another member agrees to do something else, and therefore they move towards a deepening of the architecture. We have said that all along. We've published a paper recently on this issue of the trade-off in order to complete some of the key projects that will give more strength to the euro area. So I don't know what Bruno Le Maire has been saying exactly, but if it is along those lines, asymmetry of positions, room and journey towards trade-off in order to consolidate, we are supportive wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Madam Lagarde. This lady in the second row, you've been trying very hard, ma'am. Please. I think it's Zimbabwe, is it? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a two-part question. The first one is Zimbabwe. I know, and thank you for confirming that now you have a staff-monitored program that you've agreed with the Finance Minister, Mthuli Ncube. My question is, Zimbabwe has had millions in mass exodus from 2000 all the way through the crackdown of this last January. So you have got so many people who are excluded in their values and aspirations as the structural reform program moves forward. Does the IMF have any plans in inclusivity and in those women in the diaspora who may want to see the reforms go in a particular direction and have input in every step of the decision-making process of those reforms, in particular the media reforms, which are going on right now, and there's a lot of diaspora women who are in the media space? That was my first question. Second question is, with the economic slowdown that that you're projecting, the finance minister just the other day announced that he will be introducing a new currency later in the year. I'd like to know what your views are on that in the context of the slowdown. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I would like to reaffirm that we will be conducting a staff monitoring program with Zimbabwe, and it is particularly appropriate that we do that expeditiously given the hardship and the loss caused by the recent cyclone. And we will mobilize energy in order to support the authorities. I can assure you that on the principle of social protection of the most vulnerable, of inclusion, we will be deploying the principles by which we now operate. As I have announced to the IMFC this morning, a social protection framework is going to come up for discussion at the board in the next few weeks, and we will certainly endeavour to deploy social protection principles in the work that we do with the authorities. Second point that I wanted to mention, which I believe can and will help Zimbabwe as well. Given the current monetary and currency situation, if used in a smart way, I would hope that financial technologies can be deployed in order to include as many as possible. And any knowledge, any best practices that we are aware of, we will certainly make them available in the course of the weeks to come.
Thank you very much, Madam Lagarde. So I'm swinging around here. I think we've got maybe two more. Reuters, David Lauder.
Hi, thank you. Madam Lagarde and Mr. Chairman, question for both of you. It seems to me that given the outlook that you've got that is quite uncertain, the one thing that is most under the control of policymakers is trade. That if the United States and China were able to resolve their differences and come up with a lasting agreement, how big is that in your eyes in terms of, brightening the outlook and sustaining this growth? By the same token, if the United States decides to go down the route of tariffs on autos, which would draw in a lot more countries, how bad does that look? Thank you.
You go and
Okay. A number of ministers and governors throughout these past 2 days had actually made their views well known about the benefits of trade. So we basically, as a community here, we move from the basis that free trade is beneficial for the global economy. This work that has been done, which actually showed that the current trade moves from some of the economies are actually having an adverse impact on the global economy. And without a doubt, one of the risks that we are actually highlighting as a downside risk to the growth outlook is the impact of the trade tensions. And you're right when you say that this one thing is within the control of the policymakers, except the only other thing is that it's not just the policymakers who are gathered here. We don't have the ministers of trade with us, but you're absolutely right. Trade is one of those things which, if we sort out, it should actually help us sustain the momentum. If you go back to the global financial crisis in 2008, the big thing amongst us was how do we restart the trade flows, how do we restart the trade finance so that you could have a trade going. At the time, we could see that the volumes of trade were declining. And any moves now that would impact adversely on trade going forward has got to be negative for the global economy.
You know, I'll give you, and as a follow-up to your question, I'll give you two numbers which I've shared with the members of the IMFC this morning. If you model tariffs on a large portion of the goods that are traded, you take the entire volume of goods traded between the US and China in particular, 500 billion. You apply tariffs to that. You are at risk, you're putting at risk 0.8% of global growth. If on the other hand, you eliminate only 25% of the barriers on the trading of services, you obtain the same result except positive. So minus 0.8 if you put heavy tariffs on the goods, plus 0.8 if you eliminate 25% of the tariffs on services.
Thank you, Madam Lagarde. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last question, I'm going to go to the gentleman in the front row here.
Mrs. Lagarde, I'm Michael Ignatiou from Open TV. And I wanted to ask you, it is rather amazing that there is no discussion about Greece in this meeting.
Goodness, you're here.
Yes. But we saw you yesterday chatting with Mr. Tsakalotos outside of this room, and I can say that in a casual atmosphere. Can you tell us what was the discussion was about?
Well, first of all, we have a very pleasant and courteous relationship, Euclides and myself. And I was asking him how the Greek economy is doing from his perspective, how the fiscal policies are coming out, and how the primary surplus is faring. And we, separately from that, had a lovely conversation about Greek cinema industry.
So on that note, thank you very much to the Managing Director and to the Chairman of the IMFC, and thanks to all of you.